billions of dollars, tons of cocaine, weapons of mass destruction, all potentially hidden beneath the waves in high-tech narco submarines. The US Coast Guard is all that stands between these silent threats and American shores. This is the story of their impossible war. In 2019, off the coast of Colombia, the Coast Guard made a massive bust. They intercepted a narco sub carrying 177,000 pounds of illegal drugs. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. These semi-submersible vessels are the cartel's new favorite toy. They're using them to move drugs, guns, and maybe even worse. The Coast Guard is fighting an uphill battle. They only catch about 11% of these underwater smugglers. That means billions of dollars worth of narcotics are still reaching the US. It's a cat-and-mouse game that's getting harder every day. The cartels keep improving their tech, making their subs harder to spot. Meanwhile, the Coast Guard is stretched thin, trying to patrol 6 million square miles of ocean. This is the story of David versus Goliath, played out on the high seas. So what exactly are these underwater smuggling machines that have the Coast Guard scrambling? They're called semi-submersible vessels, or narco submarines. But don't picture the massive nuclear subs from Hollywood blockbusters. These are a whole different beast. Narco subs are like the ninjas of the ocean. They're designed to stay just below the surface, with only a tiny part of the vessel peeking above the waves. We're talking about just 3 feet or less visible above water. That makes them nearly impossible to spot, even with high-tech radar. These aren't your average boats. Cartels spend big money and time on these underwater drug mules. Each one costs about $1 million to build and can take up to a year to finish. They're usually made in secret jungle locations in places like Colombia, far from prying eyes. The cartels use lightweight materials like fiberglass to build these subs. It keeps them buoyant, but still hard to detect. And they're not small either. These things can carry up to 12 tons of cargo. That's about $150 million worth of drugs in a single trip. But life on a narco sub isn't exactly luxury cruise material. The crews face serious dangers. In March 2023, Colombian Marines found a narco sub in trouble. 2 crew members were already dead from breathing in toxic fumes. These vessels are often poorly ventilated death traps. Over the years, narco subs have gotten more and more advanced. The cartels are always trying to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. Some newer models have special exhaust systems that reduce their heat signature. Some even use electric motors to eliminate exhaust altogether. And it's not just about staying hidden. These subs are built for long-haul smuggling. They can stay at sea for months, meeting up with other boats to restock supplies. They stick to less patrolled routes, blending in with the waves and staying off the radar. But the cartels aren't stopping at semi-submersibles. They're pushing the boundaries even further. There are now fully submersible narco subs that can dive up to 66 feet underwater. Try spotting that from a Coast Guard cutter, and they're getting bigger too. In 2023, Colombian authorities captured the largest narco sub ever found. This monster was 100 feet long. That's almost as long as a professional basketball court. The evolution of these narco subs shows just how determined and resourceful the cartels are. They're constantly adapting, improving their tech, and finding new ways to outsmart law enforcement. It's a high-stakes game of underwater hide-and-seek, with billions of dollars and countless lives hanging in the balance. You heard that right, 6 million square miles. That's how much ocean the Coast Guard has to patrol. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is the size of 2 USAs put together, and the needle, it's a high-tech submarine painted ocean blue. The Eastern Pacific is a drug runner's paradise. It's where about 80% of all the drugs heading to the US from South America make their way through. And guess what? A third of that is moved by these sneaky narco subs. Now, picture this. You're a Coast Guard officer on patrol. You're scanning the horizon, looking for anything suspicious. But these subs are designed to be invisible. They sit so low in the water that only about 3 feet of the vessel is above the surface. On a flat sea, even radar has a hard time spotting them. These vessels are built to sink themselves in minutes. All the evidence gone to the bottom of the ocean. So, what's the result of this impossible game of hide-and-seek? The Coast Guard only manages to intercept about 11% of the drugs passing through this region. That's right, 89% of the narcotics make it through. Let's put some numbers on that. In June 2019, they hit the jackpot. They intercepted a narco submarine carrying 17,000 pounds of cocaine. Now imagine how many they're missing. The Coast Guard is fighting this battle with one hand tied behind its back. 70% of their ships are over 50 years old. They're slow, they break down, and they cost a fortune to maintain. It's like trying to catch a Ferrari with a beat-up old pickup truck. So while the Coast Guard is out there doing their best, billions of dollars worth of drugs are still making their way to American shores. This is the reality of the drug war at sea. It's a constant game of cat and mouse, played out across millions of square miles of open ocean. The Coast Guard isn't fighting this battle alone. There's a secret weapon in the war against narco subs. It's called Operation Martillo, and it's changing the game. Operation Martillo kicked off in January 2012. Its mission? To take down international drug trafficking and bring some peace to Central and South America. But this isn't just an American thing. We're talking about a team-up between countries like you've never seen before. Each country brings something to the table. Some provide intel, others send ships and planes. It's like the Avengers, but for fighting drug cartels. And it's not just for show. This team-up is getting results. Between 2012 and 2017, Operation Martillo seized nearly 700 tons of cocaine. That's $8 billion worth of drugs that didn't make it to the streets. They also nabbed over 1,300 people involved in the trade. But here's the thing, the cartels aren't just sitting back and taking it. They're always coming up with new tricks. After 2017, the numbers started to drop. Not because Operation Martillo was slacking off, but because the bad guys were stepping up their game. Remember those narco subs we talked about earlier? Well, the cartels are making them better and better. They're building subs that can go further out to sea, finding new routes to dodge the patrols. It's like a never-ending game of naval hide-and-seek. And let's be real, Operation Martillo is facing some serious challenges. That drug-running corridor they're trying to patrol, it's over 6 million square miles. That's a lot of ocean to cover, and the US Coast Guard only has a handful of ships to do it with. But here's where the multinational part really shines. When countries work together, they can do more than they could alone. They share information, pool their resources, and coordinate their efforts. It's like having eyes and ears all over the place. This teamwork is crucial because the drug traffickers are getting smarter and more sophisticated. They're not just guys in boats anymore. They're using high-tech gear and complex strategies. It takes a united front to stand a chance against them. So yeah, Operation Martillo might not be perfect. The cartels are still getting drugs through, but without this international effort, things would be a whole lot worse. It's a constant battle, with both sides always trying to outsmart each other. In the end, Operation Martillo shows that when it comes to fighting drug trafficking, no country can go it alone. It takes a global village to tackle a global problem. And as long as the cartels keep coming up with new tricks, you can bet Operation Martillo will keep evolving to meet the challenge. You thought the cartels were done innovating? Think again. While the Coast Guard struggles to keep up, the drug lords are pushing their narco subtech to new heights. It's like a twisted underwater arms race with billions of dollars at stake. Remember those rickety subs from the 90s? They're ancient history now. Today's narco subs are a whole different beast. They're tougher, sneakier, and can carry way more drugs. The cartels are pouring serious cash and brainpower into making these things nearly impossible to catch. One of the biggest game changers? Range. The latest narco subs can travel much further out to sea. This lets them find new routes that go around the areas where the Coast Guard usually patrols. It's not just about avoiding detection. These new subs are way less likely to sink than their predecessors. But that's just the start. The cartels are getting seriously high-tech with their designs. Some of the latest models have special diffusers built into their exhaust systems. The US Coast Guard has a classification system for these underwater drug mules. Most fall under the category of self-propelled semi-submersibles, or SPSS. But that's just scratching the surface. Naval experts have identified at least 4 different types of these low-profile vessels, each with its own tricks for staying hidden. How hard are these things to spot? Picture this. A well-built narco sub has just 3 feet or less of material above the water. Even on a completely flat sea, radar has a hard time picking that up. But the cartels aren't stopping there. Some are now building fully submersible vessels. These bad boys have just a tiny snorkel poking above the waves. And the most advanced, true submarines that can dive up to 66 feet below the surface. Try spotting that from a Coast Guard cutter. Now, you might be thinking, These subs must cost a fortune, and you'd be right, each one runs about $1 million to build and takes around a year to complete. But for the cartels, it's pocket change. These subs can carry up to 12 tons of cargo. At today's prices, that's about $150 million worth of drugs in a single trip. The scary part? These subs aren't just sticking to the Americas anymore. Since at least 2019, they've been detected as far away as Europe. It's like a twisted version of a cross-ocean voyage. And when they get close to their destination, if it's too risky to land, the crew will offload the cargo at sea. They might transfer it to another boat or drop it in a floating container to be picked up later. From 2019 to 2021, the number of narco subs seized by Colombian authorities jumped from 23 to 31. That might not sound like much, but it shows two things. The authorities are getting better at finding these subs, but the cartels are building more than ever. So what's next in this underwater arms race? It's hard to say, but one thing's for sure. The cartels won't stop innovating. As long as there's money to be made, they'll keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible beneath the waves. And the Coast Guard, they'll have to work even harder to keep up. The Coast Guard might be the underdog in this fight, but they've got an ace up their sleeve. Meet Cartel, the Pacific Tactical Law Enforcement Team. These aren't your average Coast Guard officers. They're the elite, the ones who get called in when things get really tough. Cartel is based out of San Diego, but don't let that fool you. These guys deploy worldwide. They're the ones who go after the most dangerous drug runners and take on the riskiest missions. When a narco sub is spotted, Cartel is often the team that gets the call. These aren't just tough guys with guns. Cartel operates under some pretty serious legal authority. They're allowed to carry out high seas interdictions thanks to a law called 14 U.S.C. 889. It's what gives them the power to chase down drug runners in international waters. But Cartel isn't a lone wolf. They often team up with other Coast Guard units, and sometimes even the U.S. Navy. This teamwork is crucial because it lets them extend their reach without breaking an important rule called the Posse Comitatus Act. This law stops the Navy from acting as cops, but with Cartel on board, they can still help take down drug smugglers. Want to know what Cartel can do? Let's look at one of their biggest busts. In June 2019, Cartel members were on the Coast Guard cutter Monroe when they spotted a narco sub off the coast of Colombia. This wasn't just any sub, it was carrying 17,000 pounds of cocaine. Cartel didn't hesitate. They launched small boats and even used a helicopter to chase down the sub. The cartel crew tried to get away, but Cartel wasn't having it. They fired warning shots, and the sub finally stopped. But that's not all. On that same mission, the Monroe and its Cartel team took down 14 different drug boats. In just 3 months, they seized over 39,000 pounds of drugs. Cartel's success isn't a one-time thing. In November 2023, another Coast Guard ship with Cartel on board, the Weishi, nabbed over 18,000 pounds of cocaine. They busted 6 different smuggling operations, including another narco sub. Cartel's work hasn't gone unnoticed. After that big 2019 operation, Vice President Mike Pence himself came to San Diego to thank Cartel and other Coast Guard members. It was a rare moment in the spotlight for a team that usually works in the shadows. So next time you hear about a big drug bust at sea, remember Cartel. They're the ones out there, day and night, facing down some of the most dangerous criminals in the world. They might be outnumbered and outgunned, but they're not backing down. In this war against narco subs, Cartel is the Coast Guard's secret weapon. The Coast Guard might have elite teams like Cartel, but they're still fighting with one hand tied behind their back. This David and Goliath story is more lopsided than you might think. The Coast Guard is facing some serious challenges that make their job almost impossible. Let's talk numbers. The Coast Guard is the smallest branch of the US military. They're also the least funded. That's a big problem when you're trying to stop billion-dollar drug operations. It's like trying to stop a tank with a slingshot. Here's the reality. 70% of the Coast Guard's fleet is over 50 years old. These aren't cutting-edge ships ready for high-tech battles. They're old, slow, and break down a lot. And it's not just about the ships being old. The Coast Guard simply doesn't have enough of them. Remember that 6 million square mile area they're supposed to patrol? They've only got a handful of cutters to do it with. It's like trying to police an entire city with just 2 cop cars. The result? The Coast Guard is only catching about 11% of the drugs coming through the Eastern Pacific. That means 89% of the narcotics are slipping past them. billions of dollars worth of drugs are making it to American streets, and there's not much the Coast Guard can do about it. But don't think the Coast Guard isn't trying. They're working overtime, pushing their outdated equipment to the limit. Vice President Mike Pence even acknowledged their efforts, saying, "Make no mistake about it, Coasties, your courageous service is saving American lives." The problem is, courage and dedication can only get you so far when you're this outgunned. The cartels are constantly improving their tech, making their subs harder to spot and faster to escape. Meanwhile, the Coast Guard is stuck with the maritime equivalent of flip phones in an iPhone world. So what's the solution? Money. The Coast Guard needs a serious upgrade, but that doesn't come cheap. One new Legend-class cutter, like the Monroe, costs around $670 million. That's a big ask for the smallest military branch. Some experts have suggested turning the Navy's underused littoral combat ships into Coast Guard vessels. It would be a quick way to boost their fleet, but even that would just be a band-aid on a much bigger problem. The truth is, the Coast Guard needs a complete overhaul. New ships, new tech, more personnel. Without it, they'll keep falling further behind in this high-stakes game of cat and mouse. And with every narco sub that slips past, more drugs hit the streets and more lives are put at risk. This is the reality of the Coast Guard's impossible war. They're fighting against cartels with unlimited resources, using ships older than most of their crew. It's a David and Goliath story where David's slingshot is held together with duct tape and hope, and until something changes, Goliath is winning. You might think drugs are the only thing these narco subs are smuggling, but there's an even darker threat lurking beneath the waves, something that keeps counterterrorism experts up at night. For years, these experts have been sounding the alarm. Narco submarines aren't just for cocaine anymore. They could be used to move something far more sinister, weapons of mass destruction. Think about it. If these subs can carry tons of drugs undetected, what's stopping them from transporting a nuclear weapon or a dirty bomb? It's not just a wild theory. It's a real possibility that has national security teams on high alert. The potential for narco subs to move WMDs is a game changer. It's not just about stopping drugs anymore. It's about preventing a catastrophe that could change the world as we know it. Imagine a scenario where a terrorist group gets their hands on a nuclear weapon. They could use a narco sub to sneak it right past our defenses. The impact would be devastating. We're talking about unprecedented destruction, massive loss of life, and global chaos. But it's not just nukes we need to worry about. Chemical weapons, biological agents, these subs could transport any kind of WMD. And with only 11% of them being intercepted, the odds aren't in our favor. This threat has forced a shift in how we approach maritime security. It's not just the Coast Guard's problem anymore. We're talking about a multinational effort to prevent this nightmare scenario from becoming reality. Enter Operation Martillo. This isn't your average drug bust operation. Their mission? To shut down international drug trafficking and keep WMDs out of the wrong hands. We're talking about potential terrorist attacks on a scale we've never seen before. The stakes have never been higher, and the battlefield has never been more challenging. So next time you hear about a narco sub bust, remember, it's not just cocaine they're after. They're trying to stop something much, much worse. The Coast Guard's struggling to keep up, but what if they could turn the tables? There's a potential game changer on the horizon, and it's coming from an unexpected place: the military. Imagine if the Coast Guard could use the same tech that tracks enemy subs to find narco submarines. It's not just a pipe dream. Military technology, like underwater sonar, could be a lifesaver for the Coast Guard's impossible mission. These military-grade systems can spot enemy submarines from miles away. Now picture that same tech hunting down drug runners. It could be a total shift in the balance of power. But sonar's just the start. The military's got a whole arsenal of toys that could help. Take drones, for example. The Coast Guard's already using them to spot narco subs, but they need more. These subs are so hard to see, even from close up. More eyes in the sky could make a huge difference. Then there's airborne radar. It's great at spotting the masts and snorkels of these sneaky subs. But here's the kicker. Adapting this military tech for the Coast Guard isn't as simple as it sounds. It's not just about handing over some fancy gear. There are big challenges to overcome. First off, there's the cost. Military tech doesn't come cheap. The Coast Guard's already stretched thin budget-wise. Dropping millions on new gadgets? That's a tough sell. Then there's the training issue. Using this high-tech stuff takes serious skill. The Coast Guard would need to invest in some serious training programs. That takes time and money they might not have. And let's not forget about maintenance. Military gear needs constant upkeep. The Coast Guard's already struggling to keep their old ships running. Adding complex new systems could make that problem even worse. But even with these challenges, the potential payoff is huge. Right now, surface vessels without air support only have a 5% chance of spotting ultra-low profile narco subs. That's a pretty dismal number. Military tech could boost those odds. So what might this military-powered Coast Guard look like? Picture autonomous underwater vehicles patrolling the seas 24/7. Unmanned surface vehicles keeping watch over vast ocean areas, advanced sonar and radar systems picking up the faintest signs of a narco sub. But here's a wild twist. The US military's actually looking at narco sub designs for their own use. They're exploring how these stealthy vessels could help with logistics in contested areas. It's like the hunters becoming the hunted. At the end of the day, adapting military tech isn't a silver bullet. It won't solve all the Coast Guard's problems overnight, but it could be a major step in the right direction. The cat and mouse game between the Coast Guard and cartels isn't ending anytime soon. This is a never-ending battle with global stakes. Every day, Coast Guard crews put their lives on the line to stop drug shipments worth millions. But for every narco sub they catch, many more slip through. The cartels keep adapting, building better subs that can travel further and dive deeper. Meanwhile, the Coast Guard struggles with aging ships and limited resources. Despite the challenges, Coast Guard personnel remain dedicated to their mission. But as technology evolves and the ocean gets harder to police, one question remains. In this endless war beneath the waves, who will come out on top?